Welcome to the Nifty Podcast. Jamie Hershman, special guest. I think last time we had you on the podcast, I called you a very, very, very special guest, but lovely to see you.
It's a bit disappointing to be only one very this time.
I'm just trying to keep it contained. We've got a new format now, so we're just trying to build up to the very varies in time. But
okay.
Lovely to see you. Jamie, let's start by introducing yourself. You've been a very successful agent, still are a very successful agent in the Hills. How long have you been in real estate now?
This is my 5th year in real estate, so it's been a quick journey to get to where we are today. I had my license for 5 years before that, and never had the, to put it politely, kahunas to join the commission-only industry.
It's a big jump.
It is, and it's been an amazing ride so far.
Most definitely. Why did you choose the timing that you did?
We had a major health crisis in my family. My wife and son almost didn't make it through the birth experience.
Wow.
He was born 12 weeks early, and it was basically a disaster for both of them.
Yeah.
Eventually, they both got healthy and are now thriving,
awesome.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
But it was after that my wife Holly basically gave me a kick in the arse and said, you need to follow your dreams. We don't know how long life is. You've wanted to be an agent for a long time. Go do it. And I did.
That's a pretty strong reason to jump in.
Yeah.
And you're wise to do what Holly tells you to do.
Always. And if you're watching, darling, I love you.
So real estate then, and thank you for sharing that. So what was it about real estate though that was the obvious pivot, like the next industry for you?
I'd always been interested in real estate and I'd had a couple of negative real estate experiences where I was either a buyer or a seller.
Yeah.
And having a strong marketing and business background like I did, it gave me the, inkling that it could be done better. I didn't at that time know that this was a career for me, but I just thought there's got to be a better way to do this to make the customer, and in that case me, more satisfied with the overall experience. And that started the initial, I'll get the piece of paper to do it.
Yeah.
And then obviously that health drama was the pivot point where we went, let's get on with this. This is exciting.
Yeah, wow. And the Adelaide Hills, why the real estate in the Hills for you?
I've lived in the Hills for a really long time. So since we were about 10 years old, grew up in Crafers, went to local primary school, and then ultimately, when I was buying my own real estate, it was in the Adelaide Hills in Blackiston.
Yeah.
So it's an area that I love and that I was really familiar with. Mm-hmm. It was just a natural progression to sell real estate in my area.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so 5 years, pretty extraordinary 5 years in our market to be a part of it. Talk us through what you've observed over that time in the market and in your career so far.
The first year in real estate for any agent at any age is a bit brutal. You're always the unknown person and you're trying to get people to trust you.
Yep.
And it was a bit of a what I'll call colder or more stable market. The sales weren't as rapid and the prices weren't as high as they are in what we're calling or terming the COVID market that we're in at the moment.
Yeah.
So the first 18 months was just lots of hard slog, building relationships, one interaction at a time, basically.
Yeah.
And it was great. I learned a lot, developed some strong skills and relationships, and year on year been improving on that. The last 2 years have basically just been an entire step change from those first 3 years, which was a flatter market.
Yeah.
COVID and the government intervention around that to save the housing market has supercharged the market to the point where properties days on market are significantly less, the prices being achieved are significantly higher, and the timeframes and desire of both the buyers and sellers are just compressed. Everything is done at warp speed in this current market.
Yeah, and fortunately that suits your personality too.
Yeah, I'm a fast individual.
We'll definitely note that quote, I reckon.
Yeah.
And look, like particularly I agree with you, like the last, even the last 6 to 12 months in particular, they've been exceptional.
Yeah, we've sold a significant amount more property in the last 6-month period and the 6 months before that than the preceding 12 or 18 months. And that's across the market. It's just a faster, more dynamic market.
Yeah.
We've probably anecdotally had about 30% of our buyers coming from interstate.
Yeah.
And pre-COVID, that was, again, anecdotally, probably maybe 5%. And so that's ratcheted up the competition and the price points that we're seeing.
And even like, I sort of, to expand on that, and I totally agree, but like the pre-COVID market, a lot of our sellers were leaving. Like they were going interstate, and now it's almost like they're all coming back. Plus, as you say, 30%, I'd agree. It's a strong number.
Yeah, absolutely. The market being what it is, you can work anywhere in the world, and COVID's proven that with Zoom meetings and the like.
Yeah.
$1 million will buy you a certain type of property in the Eastern Seaboard.
Yes.
It will buy you a much better property in the Adelaide Hills. And so that's why we're seeing net migration of owner-occupiers coming to the Adelaide Hills.
Definitely. So with the market being so exceptional, I'm sure there's some common questions you're getting from sellers that you're interacting with. What would be the main, I guess, concerns or questions that a lot of sellers are coming to you with at the moment?
A lot of the sellers will have that natural, and it's a natural human emotion, greed. How do we maximise our profit on this sale?
Yeah.
And then on the other side of it, the fear, how do we minimise the stress to our lives? How do we make this efficient but have our landing point whilst maximising the profit? And the reality is that's a really hard thing to do in this current market where it's moving so quickly, is to have your landing point and selling journey done at the same time.
Yeah.
So what we're advising the vendors in this market to do is get your property sold, get that maximum profit. If you need to, take a breather on the sidelines before you buy the next property, but to try and do it all at once causes typically, and there's always an example or an exception to the rule where it can be done, but as a general rule, it's causing significant stress to buy and sell in the same market. And there's typically a cash buyer or a finance-only buyer that doesn't need to sell property that will trump that individual that's trying to sell and buy at the same time.
I agree, and particularly when you add the interstate dynamic as well, where if they potentially, with the equity difference between the Eastern Seaboard to here, they may not need to sell the asset they have there until they're ready, and they're just looking to buy independently. Yeah, it's very unique, and I guess as a result then, similar question for buyers in this market. Like if you are looking to buy a property right now, which is the only thing harder to do right now than buying is to rent something. But if you're a buyer, is there some tips that you're suggesting a buyer should do? Obviously, one of them is get their place sold first, and obviously with you.
Yeah, certainly. That's the number one thing. Sell with me. No.
And just roll film. No, that's it.
The buyer should definitely, and again, there's horses for courses, so it's. Each individual needs to know their risk appetite and their journey, and they know that better than us. So giving advice to all and sundry is a little bit challenging, but being prepared makes this journey much easier for a buyer.
Yes.
So they need to understand their finance position first and foremost. Do they need to borrow money? If they do, how much? Who's the lender? So get a pre-approval in place so that when they do find that property that sings to them that they absolutely want to secure, they can put in a strong offer. Secondly, if they do have property to sell, I'd always suggest getting it sold prior to, so that's not an encumbrance on their ability to purchase.
Yes.
And thirdly, know the market you're dealing with. So at the moment, the market is working incredibly efficiently. Properties are selling in a matter of days typically, sometimes even less than that. And so if a buyer is not able to attend a property quickly and make an offer quickly, it may not be the right market for them to participate in. They've got to understand the speed and dynamic of this market.
Yeah, well answered. And I think it's that speed piece. I think a lot of people underestimate. Like if you look at the average selling time for most people is, that 8 to 10 year kind of cycle.
Yes.
8 to 10 years ago, this was not happening. I mean, really, this has probably never, ever happened, what's in the current market. And I guess, the current strategy you're talking through relates to this unique market we're in as of time of recording, but obviously cycles change, don't they? And you've seen that early in your career with a totally different market.
Yeah, cycles really do move up and down. So there's the common misnomer that real estate only moves in one direction.
Yeah.
It would be wonderful if any asset class moved in only one direction, be it shares, bonds, property.
Yeah.
The reality is they all move up and down at times in the cycle. So at the moment, we're in a really strong cycle where it absolutely is moving up. In the past 12 months to date, across the Adelaide Hills, we're roughly looking at 20% growth per annum. Prior to COVID boosting our real estate, we were typically looking at, in the greater Mount Barker area, a couple of percent up or back per year. It was basically close to zero year on year type of growth for the preceding 10 years. What that looks like moving forward, the economists are telling us that sometime around May, after the election, the rates are going to start rising. It's crystal ball stuff. We don't know what's going to happen to real estate prices, and to say, I do know exactly what's going to happen, we don't. We can use our best logic, and the fact that real estate prices have risen so fast, so quickly, in this last year and a half, it would be likely that it will take a breather in the next phase, based on the fact that interest rates are going to likely start rising, and APRA is going to start possibly tightening the regulations around.
You'd think they'd keep an
finance.
eye, and they'd already have a really close eye on what's going on and try and read it.
Yeah.
And I think, like, the thing with markets too, like, all that matters is the market of the day when you're looking at moving. So if it's a tougher, like, let's say it's more of a buyer's market, like when you started your career, and most of my career has been a buyer's market. We haven't had a lot of sellers' markets. Like, there's always strategies within each market that will allow you to move forward. Like, it does. You don't need to play the market too much.
No. For us as agents, it's about servicing the need of the buyer and the seller.
So true.
We get paid by the seller, so we first and foremost work for the vendor.
Definitely.
But we need to service the needs of the buyer to make sure that it's a successful transaction, campaign, and more importantly, relationship that we maintain for a long period of time with both the buyer and seller, regardless of whether the markets are moving up or down.
Yeah, for sure. And you work, obviously working with buyers as well as sellers. When you're working with people that are considering buying investment property in the hills, do you have any strategies? And again, this is always like any video update, it's always generic advice, and obviously everyone's circumstances are individual, but is there kind of some things that you suggest to potential landlords or existing landlords that are looking at adding to their portfolio in terms of maybe locations, features of properties, those sorts of things?
Yeah, in regard to what we'll call a good rental property, and there's always different individuals will call different styles, sizes, types of property good, but as a general rule, you want a property that will attract good quality tenants.
Yes.
Good quality tenants are typically attracted to areas with good infrastructure, good schooling, good retail, and good amenities around them, like parks and green space. Mount Barker and surrounds, basically throughout the entire Adelaide Hills, we're blessed with great infrastructure, good schools, good retail, and so the rental market is incredibly buoyant. And it's, if you do have additional funds and you're looking for an investment property, now is a really good time to do that, because there's a little bit of a shortage in terms of opportunities for the tenants. So rental amounts per week are rising, and your ability to secure a great tenant who will look after the property is higher than at any other time in my career.
Yeah, well, I mean, if that's for anyone watching thinking, oh, is now the time, hearing that, that's a clearer sign that I've seen in our market. If you look at investment, I guess, jumping into property investment, it is a long-term game as well, isn't it? It's not about speculating a period in the market necessarily. It's a bigger journey.
I'd never suggest people look at an investment property with the goal of, I'm going to buy the property today and I'm going to try and sell it in 12 months and I want to make 100 grand. It's a little bit challenging. There's always macro factors to consider that will impact our market. Now, I had an investor contact me the other day, and funnily enough, or luckily enough for him, the timing has almost worked that way, where the market would have allowed him to potentially secure almost 100 grand in a year. But to say, will that happen on an ongoing basis over a 30 or 50 year cycle? Maybe 1 in 50.
Yeah, and that's amazing. Like, for context, for anyone watching this that isn't a part of our market, like, you know, our median house price is just over 500. So to have that sort of level of growth is exceptional in a 12-month period. And then I guess on the other end of the scale, then, for a first home buyer watching that, I mean, again, apart from prospective tenants right now, that's probably the hardest group of buyers trying to enter a market.
Yeah.
What are you suggesting to a first home buyer in this period?
One is, the first bit of advice is just stick with it.
Yeah.
It's incredibly disillusioning going to open inspections or private appointments week on week and just getting outbid or outplayed by other people.
Yeah.
My best advice for any buyer, first home buyer, or, you know, whether this is your 7th, 10th or 100th home, is forget about the other buyers.
Yeah.
Put your best foot forward.
Yes.
So if you know, if you're prepared and you have your finances ready and you know the type and style and quality of property, you'll be able to communicate more effectively with the agent. The agent will then have more confidence in whatever offer you put forward, and that will ultimately get portrayed to the vendor. If the vendor has confidence in your offer, you're significantly more likely to secure the property.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. Yeah, and I think I agree with you in that it's really just encouraging a first home buyer to keep participating, keep trying, go through the learning. We've seen buyers in the last 12 months that have missed out on 5, 6 properties before they get the winning bid on the one that they ultimately get. And if they stick with it, it will happen. Sometimes you might need to compromise. Maybe you're not going to get the area that you dreamed you would be in, but it gets you in a market and you're on your way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not always about changing the area. It might be about changing the expectation on the size of the home or the size of the land or the renovations you thought you were going to do in the first 6 months.
Yeah.
It's about being ready to play the game and be prepared for essentially what comes at you.
Yeah.
And as a buyer, being able to pivot to the point where you go, I can secure this property that meets most of my goals or criteria, and I can live with the ones that it doesn't quite hit, and over time work through that.
Yeah, great advice. So going back to like the seller piece, and let's say I'm a first time seller and I'm watching this podcast thinking this guy knows his stuff. I'm thinking about selling. Yeah, so far so good. And they're looking at, you know, engaging an agent. What's the first steps look like for someone considering selling? I mean, apart from saving your number in their favourites and ringing you, but from there, what does that look like with you?
So first and foremost, you want to make sure that you're getting, that you're wise in terms of what's happening in the market that you're planning on entering. So you need an agent that is not only personable and dynamic, but one that is telling you the truth and is able to sort the fact from the fiction. So in every market that we deal with, there's always going to be agents that will peddle bigger and better stories than is the actual fact of the day.
Yeah.
What we do as agents is portray the facts first and build strategies to ultimately create the best possible outcome with whatever situation is in the macro economy that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And so the first step, I would say, is get an appraisal. Understand the process, have the agent run through the process from the pricing, the strategy, the marketing and the timing. And then from there, it's a case of choosing the agent that you find is engaging and meets your needs and ideals, and then working through the relationship to create a successful campaign.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And obviously I guess to summarise it in a way, it's find an agent that you connect with and feel understands you, and then has the strategy that makes sense to you to get the best result. And that's a lot of the time going to be with yourself.
Hopefully.
Very good. So, and then looking at the Hills, obviously we've seen our community change a lot in the last, let's focus on say the last 5 years. I know you've lived in the area a lot longer than that.
Yeah.
What do you think the future of the Hills is going to start to look like, particularly with some of the shifts we've seen in the last 12 months?
It's the whole relationship that the what we'll call South Australian or Adelaide community has with the Adelaide Hills has changed. So when I started in real estate, there were pockets of the Hills which are within 10 minutes of Stirling that were considered oh, that's so far away, we don't want to visit there, we don't want to look at real estate there. Now people are looking at those areas in their first primary search.
Yeah.
So COVID's been really good for Adelaide Hills real estate. It's been terrible for a lot of pockets of the economy, and a lot of people individually. But for Adelaide Hills real estate, it's been an incredible mind change for a lot of people, because people are now searching for green. They want more space, they want more environment around them. And that initial period where we had to live with, and in South Australia we were pretty blessed, very limited lockdowns, but it was still something that became ingrained in our psyche as a population.
Yeah.
So people don't want to be locked down in their unit or apartment.
Yeah.
They want space around them. So the market now has shifted to the point where all over the Adelaide Hills is really incredible opportunities for real estate, and the buyers have now seen that, and I can't see them going back to oh, well, that's too far away for me to look at.
Yeah, I think it's really put us on the map. Not that the Adelaide Hills was invisible, but I think pockets outside of maybe the big brand name suburbs, I think people really understanding that there's a lot of depth to the hills. There's a lot of fascinating areas to live in, wonderful people, and you said it earlier, great schools, great facilities out there for people that you don't necessarily need to rely on the city too much these days either.
No, it's for all intents and purposes, you don't have to go to the city if you live in the Adelaide Hills. You've got everything at your fingertips to be able to live a full and satisfying life. Yeah,
totally agree. Do you think post-pandemic, and hopefully when we rewatch this, there is a post-pandemic, but post-pandemic, do you think that shift away from urban city to country, rural, Adelaide Hills living, do you think that's a permanent shift?
I'd like to think so. I mean, I'm no futurist.
No,
but I think with such a major shift over a period of time, plus the fact that more workplaces are now significantly more flexible, you don't have to live within 10 minutes of the city to be able to hold a job anymore.
No.
You can live in a much wider arc of the city.
Yeah.
And in reality, we're not really too far from the city anyway. Most areas in the Adelaide Hills, even in peak hour, are 45 minutes from the CBD.
Yes.
Which, for the quality of lifestyle that we get, it's pretty exceptional.
Totally agree. Save the big question last. What would be, in your mind, what would be your best kept secret in the hills? It's hard to pick one.
There's a lot. I probably wouldn't limit it to just one. I think the hospitality, the incredible wineries, cafes, main streets in little towns, all over the Adelaide Hills, just are so vibrant and welcoming. And not just vibrant and welcoming, they're high quality, world class. There's a lot of other areas, both in South Australia, and the world, that don't live up to what the Adelaide Hills produces. It's a phenomenal place.
Totally agree. Great answer. Jamie, thank you so much for being a part of the Nishki podcast. Again,
am I very special?
Very, very, very special guest always.
Thank you.
Thanks, buddy. All the
Appreciate
best.
It. Thanks,
Cheers.
mate.
Thanks.